I knew something was wrong the moment my phone buzzed on a Thursday night. The message was short: family meeting. Sunday, 3 p.m. Be on time. No hello, no signature, no explanation, just a command typed in my mother's precise and icy manner. I stared at the screen for a long minute, half expecting another message to follow, maybe something softer, like we should talk or hope you are well. But nothing came. The silence after that message was almost louder than the message itself. I thought of ignoring it, but curiosity has always been my flaw. When Sunday arrived, the sky was clear, the kind of crisp autumn day when sunlight turns golden and the air feels sharper than usual. I drove back to the Harper estate, a place I had avoided since the funeral 3 weeks earlier. The house had always struck me as proud. 3 stories, shutters painted navy blue, white columns standing tall at the entrance. My grandfather loved order, and he loved appearances. Even now, the hedges were trimmed, the gravel driveway raked into neat lines, as if he were still there directing the gardeners himself. But I could sense the absence of him before I even stepped inside. The estate without him felt hollow, like a theater set after the actors have left. I stood at the porch for a moment, letting the weight of memory press down on me. I could almost hear his voice echoing through the halls. He used to call me his shadow when I followed him during his evening walks around the garden. That was when I was a child, long before the years made our family more fractured than whole. The door swung open before I even raised a hand to knock. My mother stood there, perfectly styled as always. Her blonde hair freshly curled, her dress tailored in a way that whispered wealth but also desperation. She wore her public face, the one she had practiced for charity galas and society brunches. A smile that was all teeth and no warmth. "Alexandra," she said, her voice sharp as porcelain. "Right on time. Come in." Inside, the house smelled faintly of polish and old wood, the kind of scent that never really left the Harper estate. The living room, where we used to gather on Christmas mornings, was rearranged. The sofas and chairs positioned not for comfort but for confrontation. My mother had staged it like a courtroom. Lillian sat on the edge of the sofa, back stiff, hands folded in her lap. She avoided my eyes, staring at her knees like a schoolgirl being scolded. Ethan, my younger half-brother, kept his gaze on the floor too. His hair was uncombed, his eyes red, as though he hadn't slept. My stepfather, Richard, leaned against the fireplace. His arms crossed in a posture that was meant to be authoritative, but looked more like he had been rehearsing in front of a mirror. He cleared his throat when I entered, as if that alone gave him control of the room. But it was not them who caught me off guard. It was the 2 strangers in dark suits occupying the armchairs near the window. Those seats had always been considered family seats. My grandfather used to sit there with a glass of scotch and a newspaper. Now 2 men with leather folders and slick smiles occupied the space. My mother gestured toward them as if introducing me to friends. "Alexandra, these are Mr. Caro and Mr. Doyle. They are here to help us resolve certain matters." Their suits were too perfect, their hair too carefully combed. They had the practiced air of men used to delivering unwelcome news and walking away without a stain on their conscience. I did not shake their hands. I sat in the single wooden chair placed deliberately across from all of them. Its back was hard, its position isolated. It was not chosen for comfort. It was chosen for intimidation. Richard offered me coffee. My mother repeated his gesture, her smile fixed like glass. I crossed my legs and folded my arms, refusing both. My throat felt dry, but I would not accept anything served under this roof tonight. "Why am I here?" I asked. "Because we are family," my mother replied. Her voice dipped into that syrupy tone she used when she wanted something. "And because your grandfather would have wanted us to face this together." Her words twisted in my chest. My grandfather had died 3 weeks ago, yet his presence lingered like a ghost in this room. He had been the anchor of this family, the man who built everything we lived on. His absence had left a void, and now everyone was circling, vultures around the legacy he left behind. I looked at Lillian, then at Ethan. Neither met my gaze. Their silence spoke more than words. The 2 men in suits shifted slightly, their folders balanced on their knees, waiting for a cue. This was not a meeting. This was a performance. And I was the only one who had not been given a script. I leaned back slightly in the chair, though it was impossible to relax against the stiff wooden frame. Every pair of eyes in the room was on me, weighing, measuring, waiting for me to react. I hated that feeling, as if I were prey being studied by hunters. Mr. Caro cleared his throat softly. He had the kind of polished accent that suggested boarding schools and polished shoes. "Miss Harper, thank you for joining us. We are here to ensure a smooth transition during this delicate time for your family." I raised an eyebrow, smooth transition, a phrase that sounded harmless but dripped with hidden intent. My mother clasped her hands together on her lap, tilting her head like an actress posing for a magazine cover. Alexandra, darling, you know that your grandfather's estate is complicated. He was a brilliant man, but sometimes his decisions were not practical. Richard spoke next, his voice heavier. What your mother means is he was too generous, too trusting. Now we have to be responsible for what he left behind. Responsible. That word burned on my tongue, as if they had ever been responsible for anything beyond their own desires. I said nothing. Silence has a way of making people nervous, and I wanted them nervous. Ethan shifted in his seat. His shoulders were hunched, his fingers restless against his jeans. He looked like a boy dragged into detention for something he did not fully understand. For a moment, I wanted to reach out to him, but the atmosphere made every gesture feel dangerous. Mr. Doyle finally spoke. His voice was smoother, less rehearsed than Caro, but still cold. Your grandfather built a company of great importance. He also left behind assets, properties, investments. But there are questions about how best to manage them and who should bear the responsibility. The words settled over the room like smoke. That was it. That was why they had called me here. My mother leaned forward slightly, her eyes narrowing as her smile held. Alexandra, we only want what is best for everyone. This family has been through so much already. We should not let greed or stubbornness tear us apart. Greed, stubbornness. The irony was sharp enough to draw blood. I opened my mouth to speak, but stopped. My grandfather's face flashed in my mind, the lines of determination etched across his features even in his final days. He used to tell me that silence was a weapon. People reveal themselves when you give them room to speak, so I gave them room. Lillian was the first to break. Her voice trembled as she said, Grandpa loved all of us. He would never choose one over the rest. Ethan's head lifted slightly, as though he wanted to agree but could not quite find the courage. His lips parted, then closed again. My mother sighed dramatically, like a woman burdened with too much sorrow. Alexandra, surely you see the sense in keeping everything together. We can manage the estate as a family, as your grandfather would have wanted. I finally leaned forward. My voice was calm, steady. He wrote a will. The words fell into the silence like stones into water. Richard's jaw tightened. His eyes, hard and cold, flicked toward my mother. The two men in suits shifted again, their folders opening slightly, papers rustling. Yes, my mother said quickly. He wrote a will. But a will can be interpreted. Surely you would not want to create conflict over a technicality. A technicality. I repeated the word softly, letting its absurdity hang in the air. Caro cleared his throat again, sensing the tension. Miss Harper, no one is here to deny your position. We are simply here to guide the family toward harmony. Harmony. That word sounded like a joke. The room grew heavier. I could hear the faint ticking of the old grandfather clock in the corner, the sound my grandfather used to say reminded him that time waits for no one. Now, it felt like a countdown. I glanced at Ethan again. He met my eyes this time, just for a second, and in that brief connection I saw confusion, fear, and something else. A silent plea. I wanted to stand, to walk out, to refuse the charade, but another part of me knew I needed to stay. Because whatever game they were playing, they had prepared their moves. If I left now, they would only come after me harder. So I stayed seated, calm on the outside though my heart hammered like a fist against my ribs. This was not a meeting. This was a performance. A performance with me as the unwilling star. And if they expected me to play the obedient role, they were going to be disappointed. 2 days after that suffocating family meeting, I found myself walking into a paneled office that smelled faintly of leather and old books. The law firm handling my grandfather's estate had been in business for more than a century, and the weight of history clung to every brass fixture and polished mahogany surface. The conference room was already full when I arrived. My mother in black silk, oversized sunglasses still perched on her face even indoors. Richard beside her, stiff as always, arms folded across his chest like he could intimidate the entire legal profession into submission. Lillian sat with her legs crossed too tightly, clutching a handkerchief though there were no tears on her face. And Ethan, poor Ethan, slouched in his chair, staring at the table as though hoping to disappear into it. The executor, Mr. Halden, greeted me with a professional nod. His gray hair was neatly parted, his voice calm and deliberate. Miss Harper, thank you for coming. Please take a seat. I slid into the empty chair, leather creaking softly beneath me. The air was heavy, a silence so thick it seemed to muffle even the distant sounds of traffic outside. Mr. Halden began with the usual formalities, reading from the crisp pages of the will. Minor bequests to old employees. Donation to my grandfather's alma mater. A scholarship fund for young scientists. My mother tapped her manicured nails on the table, clearly impatient, as though all this generosity was an inconvenience. And then he reached the part that would change everything. To my granddaughter, Alexandra Harper, I leave the remainder of my estate. This includes, but is not limited to, all remaining shares in Harper Biotech, my personal investment accounts, all real property holdings, and all personal effects. The words seemed to echo in the silence that followed. I felt the shock ripple through the room before anyone spoke. My mother's hand froze mid-tap. Lillian gasped softly, like a line in a play. Richard muttered something under his breath, and Ethan just looked up at me with wide, bewildered eyes. This must be a mistake, my mother said sharply, pushing her sunglasses up onto her head. He must have been confused. Read it again. I have read it many times, Mrs. Harper, Mr. Haldon replied evenly. Your father was explicit. Lillian's voice shook. He loved all of us. He would not pick favorites. Richard leaned forward, his voice low and menacing. This cannot stand. We will contest it. I sat perfectly still. My fingers curled into the leather of the armrest, grounding me. I had not expected this, not so directly. I had always been close to my grandfather, but I had never imagined he would leave me everything. The responsibility weighed on me even as the shock of it registered. My mother's voice turned colder. Alexandra, you know this is not right. This estate belongs to all of us. Your grandfather was not himself in the last months. He was manipulated. Her eyes bored into me as though trying to pierce through my calm expression. But I remembered. I remembered the day 6 months before his death, when he had called me into his study. His voice had been strong then, his mind sharper than ever. He had looked me in the eyes and said, "They will not understand this decision, Alexandra. But I built this for someone who knows what it cost me. That person is you." It had not felt like a compliment then. It had felt like a burden. And now it was mine. I did not answer her accusations. Not yet. Mr. Haldon cleared his throat, his voice steady. The will is clear. Unless contested with valid legal grounds, it stands as written. The room was thick with fury. My mother whispered something under her breath, words sharp as broken glass. Richard's knuckles whitened as his fists clenched. And me? I sat quietly, my heart pounding but my face calm, because deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. The silence that followed was not ordinary silence. It was heavy, charged, almost electric, as though the room itself was holding its breath. I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning, the scratch of a pen from the assistant sitting in the corner, even the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears. My mother was the first to recover. She leaned back in her chair and let out a brittle laugh, the kind she used at social functions when someone said something vulgar and she wanted to prove she was above it. Well, this is certainly dramatic. Father always did enjoy theatrics, but let us be sensible, Alexandra. You cannot possibly believe he intended for you to shoulder this alone. I turned my gaze toward her. Her eyes were sharp, calculating. She wanted me to waver, to doubt. She wanted me to feel the weight of the room pressing me into compliance. Richard slammed his palm against the table. This is nonsense. You are 27 years old, Alexandra. You are not prepared to manage a corporation, an estate of this size. You barely enough, I interrupted, my voice steady though my stomach nodded. Do not mistake my silence for weakness. The room stiffened. Even Mr. Haldon paused, his eyes flicking to me before returning to his documents. My mother leaned forward, lowering her voice into something almost intimate. Alexandra, listen to me. You are not the only one who loved him. We all did, but he was not thinking clearly. He was tired, vulnerable, and you spent too much time with him. Of course he adored you, but he was easily swayed at the end. Her words sliced deep, but beneath them I could hear the desperation. She wanted to rewrite the truth. She wanted to pretend the man who raised me, who taught me discipline and vision, had been a confused old man when he made his choice. But I remembered his clarity, the way his eyes had locked onto mine, the certainty in his voice when he told me the family would not accept it and that I must be strong. I said nothing. Silence, once again, was my shield. Lillian spoke up then, her voice soft, almost pleading. Alexandra, please, do not let this ruin everything. We are still your family. The words might have touched me once, but hearing them now, staged in this room, surrounded by hostility, they felt hollow. Ethan had still not spoken. He sat slouched, his fingers tapping against the table, his eyes fixed on some distant point. I wondered what he was thinking, whether he resented me or pitied me. Whether he even understood the storm gathering around us. Mr. Haldon closed the folder with a decisive snap. The will has been read in full, Unless there are legal motions to contest, this concludes the matter for today." My mother rose abruptly. Her chair scraped against the polished floor with a screech that made me flinch. "This is not over," she said, her voice low but venomous, "not by a long shot." Richard followed, his jaw tight. Lillian hurried after them, her handkerchief still clenched in her fist. Only Ethan lingered. He looked at me, his eyes tired, uncertain. Then he shook his head slightly, as though trying to rid himself of thoughts he could not bear. He walked out without a word. I remained seated for a long moment, the room empty now except for me and the executor. "Miss Harper," Mr. Haldon said quietly, "your grandfather's instructions were deliberate. He updated the will 6 months before his passing. He was of sound mind. I know this family may make things difficult for you, but you are on firm ground." I nodded. My throat felt dry. "Thank you." He hesitated, then added, "Your grandfather spoke of you often. He believed you were the only one who shared his discipline, his restraint. He trusted you to protect what he built." His words were meant as reassurance, but they landed like a weight on my shoulders, a burden more than a gift. When I finally left the building, the city outside felt loud, chaotic. Cars honked, people hurried past, voices rose and fell in every direction. But all I could hear was my mother's voice in my head. "This is not over," and I knew she was right. That night the messages began. "Lillian first, please do not let this ruin everything. We are still your family." Then my mother, "You will understand once you have children of your own. Family comes first." Then Ethan, just one word, sent at nearly 2 in the morning. Why? By morning, my voicemail was full. Old acquaintances of my mother, women I had not seen since childhood birthday parties, called to tell me how disappointed they were. How heartbreaking it was that I was letting money come between us. Disappointment. That was the word that kept appearing, as though my grandfather's choice was my betrayal. I sat on the floor of my apartment, phone buzzing beside me, messages piling up. And for the first time since the will had been read, I let myself feel it all. The shock, the anger, the fear. And beneath it all, a flicker of something else. Resolve, because I understood now. This was not about grief, not about family. This was about power, and they were not going to stop until they had taken it from me. The days that followed blurred together into a strange haze of noise. My phone never seemed to stop vibrating. Messages, missed calls, voicemails. Some from numbers I did not recognize, some from people I had not spoken to in years. All of them carried the same message in different words. I was wrong, I was selfish, I was betraying the family. At first, I tried to ignore it. I silenced my phone, left it face down on the counter, but ignoring did not stop it. It only grew louder in the silence of my apartment. The words, even when left unread, seemed to seep through the glass screen like smoke. On the third night, I woke at 2 a.m. to find my inbox flooded again. "Your mother is devastated. Your cousin is heartbroken." Do the right thing, even a few Bible verses copy-pasted and sent as if scripture alone could bend me. I sat up in bed, staring at the glow of the screen. My chest tightened. For a moment, I thought about deleting everything. But then I remembered something my grandfather once told me: paper keeps memory, screens forget. So the next morning, I bought a printer. I started saving every message, every voicemail transcript, every screenshot, printing them one by one. Soon the floor of my apartment was littered with sheets of paper, a sea of accusations and manipulations. It felt obsessive, but also necessary. If this turned into a war, I would need evidence. The door buzzer startled me that afternoon. When I checked the monitor, Ethan was standing there. His jacket collar turned up against the wind, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He looked younger than his 19 years, almost boyish, his shoulders slumped. I opened the door. He did not step inside. "I am not here to fight," he said quickly. "Okay," I answered, my voice cautious. He glanced up at me, eyes bloodshot, his face pale. "Mom is losing it. She is already calling real estate agents. She says she has to refinance the house before you freeze the assets." I blinked. "I have not frozen anything." "She does not believe that," he whispered. Then he added, "I just thought you should know. She is planning something." Before I could respond, he turned and walked back down the hall. No hug. No handshake, just a shadow retreating into the gray afternoon. I closed the door and stood there in the quiet, staring at the papers scattered across my floor. My anger was gone, replaced by something colder. A stillness that felt like the moment before a storm breaks. That evening, Marcus came over with takeout. He found me sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by papers like a general planning a battle. He set the food down, sat beside me, and took my hand. "I am worried about you," he said gently. I shook my head. "I am fine." "You are not," he countered softly. "And you do not have to be." For a while we just sat in silence. The kind of silence that does not press or accuse but allows you to breathe. Then he said, I want you to meet someone. Her name is Sophia Lane. She is an attorney, an old friend from law school. She is not aggressive unless she needs to be, but she is good. She is the kind of person who protects people like you from people like them. I hesitated. I do not want a war, Marcus, and you may not get to choose, he replied. The next morning I called Sophia. Her office was small, tucked above a florist shop. No marble floors, no intimidating glass walls, just natural light, the faint scent of lilies from below, and shelves of books stacked haphazardly. She welcomed me with a warm smile, no judgment in her eyes, only focus. I told her everything. The will, the meeting, the endless stream of messages. The threats implied but not spoken. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepled. You are already in the middle of a coordinated pressure campaign, she said. Classic tactics. They want to overwhelm you emotionally until you sign something. I swallowed. I do not want to fight them. I just want it to stop. Then we prepare, she answered. Document everything. Do not delete a single message. Do not sign anything, not even something that looks harmless. They will disguise poison as tea if they have to. I nodded. Her words steadied me. As I left her office, I felt something I had not felt in weeks. Not relief, not safety, but a plan. Still that night, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my phone buzzed again. Another message. This one was just a photo of my mother shopping for patio furniture, her smile wide, the caption smug. Self-care. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to scream. Instead, I reached for the printer and hit print. Because Sophia was right, they would not stop, and I had to be ready. The formal invitation came as a text message late on a Thursday night. It was from my mother, though it could have been written by a stranger. Sunday, 3 p.m. house. Bring your paperwork, we will resolve this. No signature, no smiley face. No attempt at softness, just a command as if she were issuing orders to a servant. I stared at the words for a long time. A pit opened in my stomach. This was not a request, it was a trap. When I told Sophia the next morning, she frowned. This feels like an ambush. It is, I admitted. Then do not go, she urged, but I shook my head. If I refused, they would paint me as the problem. And worse, they would not stop. They would only escalate. No, I have to go, but I want you nearby. Sophia studied me for a moment, then nodded. One text from you, and I will be at the door in 60 seconds. The days crawled toward Sunday, each hour heavy with anticipation. I tried to distract myself with work, with cleaning, with anything that would occupy my hands. But my mind always circled back to that house, that living room, those eyes watching me. Sunday arrived colder than expected. The wind cut sharp against my face as I walked up the gravel driveway. The hedges were still neat, the porch swept, but the house felt different, as if it had been waiting for me, holding its breath for the coming confrontation. The curtains were drawn tight. Even the porch light seemed dimmer, though it was still afternoon. Before I could knock, the door opened. My mother stood there, her hair freshly styled, her lipstick a shade too bright. She beamed as if welcoming me to a celebration, not an ambush. Alexandra, she said brightly, right on time. The living room was arranged just as I expected. Lillian on the sofa, spine straight, hands clenched in her lap. Ethan beside her, eyes down, shoulders hunched. Richard by the fireplace, looming like a guard dog. And the two men in suits, Caro and Doyle, seated comfortably in the armchairs. Their briefcases lay open on the low table between us, papers neatly stacked, pens uncapped. They looked like men settling in for an easy victory. Only one chair was open. A wooden one, straight-backed, placed directly across from all of them. I sat without hesitation, laying my leather folder across my lap. Would you like some coffee? My mother asked sweetly, as though we were guests at a polite brunch. I shook my head. Let's get to it. Caro cleared his throat. We are here today because your family is deeply concerned about the strain this has caused. No one wants a prolonged dispute. Your grandfather's intention, surely, was for the family to stay united. I let the silence stretch before answering. He wrote a will. My mother jumped in quickly, her smile fixed. And we are not disputing that, sweetheart. But surely you can agree that splitting everything between us would be more harmonious. Harmony, I said quietly, was not in the will either. Doyle slid a stack of papers toward me. This is a voluntary redistribution agreement. You would retain a healthy portion, 20%. The rest would return to the family, as was always understood. Understood by whom? I asked, my voice flat. Lillian finally spoke, her voice trembling. Grandpa was sick, Alexandra. He was not thinking clearly. He thought you would know what to do. I met her gaze for the first time. I do know what to do. Which is why I will not be signing anything. Richard shifted by the fireplace, his jaw tightening. My mother's smile wavered just for a moment. Caro leaned forward, his tone sharpening. It would be unfortunate if this moved to court. Claims of undue influence could muddy the estate's reputation. There it was, the threat. I rested my hand on the folder in my lap. My pulse quickened, but my voice stayed calm. Before I respond, I want to clarify one thing. The room stilled. 6 months ago, I said, turning to Richard, you mentioned to one of the nurses that you had already put a deposit on a property in Naples. Was that with inheritance money you had not yet received? His mouth opened, then closed. I did not give him time to recover. I have a recording and a paper trail. My mother's smile cracked, the mask slipping. I opened the folder and laid a single sheet on the table, my grandfather's handwriting. Loan to Denise, $30,000. Said it was for Ethan's tuition. Learned later it was a cruise. Lillian gasped softly. Richard swore under his breath. I looked up at the two men in suits. Still feel like drawing up paperwork today? Neither answered. My mother shot to her feet, her chair scraping against the floor. You ungrateful little, I slid another paper across the table. May 8th. You told Grandpa Lillian needed emergency dental surgery. He gave you $20,000. You were in Scottsdale that weekend. Spa package. I remember the monogrammed robe. Lillian's face drained of color. Caro shifted uncomfortably. Doyle closed his briefcase. This was not what they had expected, and I was not finished. I had expected them to back down after the papers I laid out on the table. I had imagined silence, retreat, maybe even shame, but I should have known better. Shame was not something my family carried. They carried entitlement, anger, and the kind of stubbornness that grows when people believe the world owes them more than it ever promised. The room did not empty after I revealed the first pieces of truth. It thickened. The air turned sharp, brittle, like glass ready to shatter. My mother lowered herself back into her chair with slow, deliberate grace. She smoothed her dress as though that tiny motion could stitch her mask back together. Then she looked at me with eyes so cold they could have frozen the air. Alexandra, she said, her tone heavy with disappointment, you think you are clever, digging through scraps and scribbles from a dying man. But all you have proved is that you are willing to betray your own family to hold on to money that was never meant to be yours alone. Her words rang like accusations carved in stone. I kept my voice calm. They are not scraps, they are records, and they are proof that he was not confused, not manipulated. He knew exactly what he was doing when he left everything to me. Richard's voice rumbled from the fireplace. You are making a mistake. Do you think investors will trust you when they learn you turned against your own blood? Companies crumble under scandals smaller than this. For a moment, I let their threats settle. Then I leaned forward, placing both hands on the table. Let me make something clear. I am not here to bargain. I am not here to beg. I am here because he trusted me. And I will not let you erase that. Lillian's hands trembled as she clutched the handkerchief tighter. Alexandra, please, you are tearing us apart. We were torn long before this, I replied softly. You just did not want to see it. Caro and Doyle exchanged a glance. Their confidence was fading. They had expected a cornered girl, pliable and desperate. Instead, they found me standing my ground with a folder of truths they could not dismiss. Finally, Doyle cleared his throat. Perhaps we should step outside, Mrs. Harper. Allow the family to speak privately. But my mother waved him down. No, stay. This is family business, but it is also about protection. We all need protection. Protection, I thought. That was her word for control. The standoff might have stretched forever if not for Ethan. His voice cut through the silence, quiet but steady. Is it true? Everyone turned to him. He was staring at our mother, his eyes wide but unblinking. Is it true you took money in my name? For tuition, her lips parted but no sound came out. I already knew the answer. The records in my folder spoke for themselves, but hearing him ask, seeing the way his voice cracked on the word tuition, broke something inside me. My mother found her voice at last. Ethan, darling, you do not understand. It was temporary, just a loan. I was going to replace it. Ethan's face flushed. You lied. You told me we could not afford books that semester. You told me to skip classes because tuition was late. And all the time you were on a cruise. The room seemed to shrink around us. Lillian shifted uncomfortably. Richard muttered something about keeping calm, but the damage was done. Ethan stood abruptly, his chair toppling back. His hands were shaking. I cannot do this, he whispered. He turned to me then, eyes burning with something raw. Can I come with you? My mother's face hardened. Ethan, sit down. No, the word rang like a bell. I rose slowly, meeting his gaze. Yes, I said simply. Come with me. Richard took a step forward, puffing out his chest. You little, I raised my phone. This conversation is being recorded. He froze. The tension snapped then. Caro and Doyle gathered their papers in haste. We will excuse ourselves, Caro muttered. Mrs. Harper, we were not aware of any outside counsel already retained. My mother's expression twisted into stone. "This is not over," she hissed. "Actually," I said, sliding the last document back into my folder, "it is." I gathered my papers, slow and deliberate. My heartbeat steadied, no longer frantic but resolute. "I will not sign anything. I will not enable your spending. And I will not let you rewrite the past." My mother's voice cracked as she spat the words, "You owe us." I shook my head. "I owe him." Then I turned toward the door, Ethan close behind me. We stepped out of the house into the cold air, the door slamming behind us so hard the porch light flickered. For a moment I stood still on the gravel driveway, breathing deeply, letting the tension drain from my shoulders. Ethan stayed close, his hands jammed into his pockets. He did not speak, but the look in his eyes told me enough. He was exhausted, furious, and frightened, all at once. A black sedan idled down the street. Inside, Sophia sat with a coffee cup in one hand and her phone in the other. When she saw us, she was out of the car in seconds. "You okay?" she asked, scanning Ethan first, then me. "He is with me," I said, "and we are done here." Ethan nodded mutely, his jaw tight. Sophia's eyes softened. "All right, let's get you both out of here." We drove in silence. Ethan sat in the passenger seat of my car, staring straight ahead, his fingers occasionally tightening around the seatbelt. I kept glancing at him, wanting to say something, but not knowing where to start. Back at my apartment, I unlocked the door and gestured him inside. "You are on the couch," I said. "It folds out. Sheets are clean." He nodded without looking at me. "Thanks. We did not talk that night. I made tea," he drank it. I scrolled through emails, he stared at the ceiling. The silence between us was not heavy. It was healing, a shared quiet that asked for nothing. When morning came, I found him still on the couch, curled beneath the blanket. Sunlight spilled across the room, catching the lines of tension on his face even in sleep. My chest tightened. He had been caught in the crossfire of something he never asked for. Later that day, I returned to the Harper estate. Not for them, for me, for him, for my grandfather. The house was silent. The rooms smelled of dust and memory. I walked straight to his study, the one place that had always felt like a sanctuary. The desk was exactly as he had left it. Papers stacked neatly, pens aligned, a faint scent of coffee lingering. I pulled open the center drawer. Inside lay the leather-bound journal I had seen before but never fully opened. My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages. Dates, numbers, notes in his sharp handwriting. Small observations, memories, reminders. He had kept track of everything as if he knew this day would come. Near the back, I found something new. A margin note, scribbled hastily but clearly. "Alexandra has what Denise never learned, restraint, clarity. If she chooses to lead, this business may survive me. If she chooses to love, it may outlive us both." I sat there a long time, staring at those words. My throat tightened, my eyes burned, but I refused to let the tears fall. This was not about grief anymore. It was about purpose. That afternoon, I met Sophia for lunch at a small cafe near her office. I slid the journal across the table, opened to the page with my grandfather's words. She read quietly, her brow furrowing, then nodded. "We will file this as supplementary evidence with the probate court. It strengthens your position, seals any cracks they might try to exploit." I exhaled slowly. "Good. And there is something else we can do," she added. "You want Ethan safe?" "Yes," I nodded. "We can draft an educational trust in his name. Enough to cover his degree, maybe some living expenses. Clean, independent, no strings attached." The thought eased something in my chest. "Thank you," I said. Later that evening, I came home to find Ethan sitting on the couch, reading one of my grandfather's old trade magazines. His face was calmer now, focused. "You know," I said, leaning against the doorway, "Grandpa always wanted to expand into sustainable materials. Green biotech, renewable compounds. The board would not move fast enough for him." Ethan looked up. "I remember. He used to rant about it at dinner." I smiled faintly. "What would you say to an internship? Real work. No shortcuts." He blinked, then frowned. "Are you serious?" "Completely." For the first time in weeks, I saw him smile. Relief, hope, maybe even pride flickered in his expression. "Yeah," he said quietly, "I would like that." We clinked our mugs of cold tea together in a silent agreement. It was not the kind of reconciliation my mother had wanted. It was something stronger, something real. That night, I lay awake thinking of my grandfather's words. If she chooses to lead, if she chooses to love. I was choosing both. The storm did not pass after Ethan chose to leave with me. It only shifted its shape. In the days that followed, silence from my mother was replaced with noise from every direction. Former friends of hers, people I barely remembered from childhood, reached out to me. Their words dripped with disapproval wrapped in feigned concern. "Your mother is devastated. You cannot do this to your family. Think about your legacy." But their voices no longer reached me the way they once did. I had seen behind the curtain. I had heard Ethan's voice crack when he demanded the truth from her, and I had watched her falter. The image of her standing speechless while he accused her of betrayal was seared into my mind. One evening, Ethan sat across from me at the kitchen table, his hands wrapped around a mug of tea he did not drink. He stared at the steam rising, his face heavy with thought. "I never knew," he whispered. "I never knew she used me like that. You were a child," I said gently. "It was not your job to know." His eyes lifted to mine, filled with hurt and something harder, anger. "She told me you were selfish, that you only cared about money." I believed her. I nodded slowly. "I know." He looked down again, shaking his head. "I do not know who she is anymore. She is who she has always been, Ethan. You are just seeing her clearly now." The words tasted bitter even as I said them. Later that week, Sophia filed the educational trust for Ethan. It was a simple document, clean and precise, ensuring his tuition and living expenses would be covered without strings. When I handed him the papers, his hands trembled. "This is for me?" "Yes, no one can take it from you." His eyes filled with tears he refused to let fall. "Thank you." That moment, small and quiet, felt more significant than any battle I had fought with my mother. For the first time, Ethan stood free of her shadow, but freedom came at a cost. News began to circulate in whispers. Rumors spread among family friends, board members, even local reporters sniffing around. Words like dispute, contested estate, family betrayal. My mother's circle was leaking poison into the air, and I could feel it tightening around me. One night, my phone rang past midnight. The number was unfamiliar, but I answered anyway. A voice I recognized immediately spoke from the other end. "My mother, you think you have won," she said coldly, "but you have no idea what you are walking into. You cannot hold this family together by clinging to scraps of paper." I almost laughed. "I am not trying to hold this family together." "Then you are tearing it apart," she snapped. "Do you want that on your conscience?" I wanted to tell her she had done that long before me, but I stayed silent. Silence has always been my sharpest blade. She hung up with a slam of finality. The next morning, a photo appeared in one of the local gossip columns online. My mother at a dinner with potential investors, smiling like a queen, her hand resting casually on Richard's arm. The caption speculated about a family company in turmoil, vulnerable to takeover. My stomach turned cold. This was not just about inheritance anymore. She was already plotting her next move. I showed the article to Ethan over breakfast. His fork froze halfway to his mouth. "She is going to sell it," he whispered. I nodded grimly. "She will try." We sat in silence for a long while. The clink of dishes, the hum of the refrigerator, the ordinary sounds of life pressed against the extraordinary weight of what lay ahead. Finally, Ethan spoke, his voice steady. "Then we stop her." Stopping her sounded simple when Ethan said it at the breakfast table, but nothing with my mother was ever simple. By the following week, the attacks grew sharper. She no longer hid behind whispers or friends' voices. She came at me directly. I returned home one evening to find a letter slipped under my door. Thick cream paper, her handwriting looping elegantly across the page. "Alexandra, you cannot carry this burden alone. You will destroy yourself and you will drag Ethan down with you. Do not make me fight you. Sign the redistribution agreement and let us repair what is left of this family." At the bottom was her signature, bold and decisive, as if the matter was already resolved. I placed the letter beside the growing pile of evidence in my folder. It joined dozens of screenshots, voicemails, transcripts, a record not of grief but of war. That night, Ethan hovered in the doorway as I worked. His eyes darted to the papers spread across my desk. "She will not stop, will she?" he asked quietly. "No," I said. "She will not." He stepped closer. "Then we cannot stop either." His words struck me with unexpected force. For so long, I had felt like I was standing alone against them. But here he was, this boy who had been used and deceived, now choosing to stand with me. The next confrontation came sooner than expected. It was a Friday evening when Sophia called. Her voice was crisp, edged with urgency. "Alexandra, I just received notice. Your mother's attorneys are filing preliminary motions to contest the will." I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. "On what grounds?" "Undue influence. Lack of capacity. The usual." "Nothing solid, but enough to drag you through months of hearings if they push it." I swallowed hard. "And the board, they are nervous. Whispers of instability make investors skittish. You need to get ahead of this." After the call, I sat in the dim light of my apartment, Ethan beside me. My chest felt tight, my mind racing. "She is trying to break me," I whispered. "Then let her try," Ethan said firmly. "She has already broken herself." His words steadied me more than I expected. 2 days later, I faced her again. Not in the house this time, but in a sterile conference room at the courthouse. Sophia by my side, Richard by hers. Lillian sat quietly in the corner, her eyes red but her voice silent. The judge had not yet entered, but the air was already thick with hostility. My mother leaned across the table, her perfume sharp, her smile sharper. You can end this today, Alexandra. One signature. 20% is generous. I met her gaze, unflinching. Generous is not stealing less. Her smile cracked for the first time. Richard muttered something under his breath, but Sophia cut in smoothly. Unless you have evidence to support your claims, this conversation is finished. My mother's eyes narrowed. Evidence? She turned to me. What about loyalty? What about blood? I let out a breath. Loyalty is earned, and blood is not a free pass. For a long moment, she stared at me, fury simmering beneath the surface. Then she stood abruptly, her chair scraping back. This is not the end, she hissed. The judge entered and the proceedings began. Hours later, when it was done for the day, I stepped outside into the late afternoon light. The courthouse loomed behind me, gray and heavy, but the air felt clearer. Ethan joined me on the steps, his shoulders squared, his face resolute. We are not finished, he said. No, I agreed, but we are closer. As we walked down the steps together, I realized something important. The family had fractured. My mother and Richard on one side, me and Ethan on the other. And though the war was not over, the truth was beginning to show its face. The exposure had begun, and once the truth starts to surface, there is no way to bury it again. I returned to my grandfather's study on a cold morning that smelled of rain and old wood. The house was empty, but it did not feel abandoned. His presence lingered in the way the curtains were drawn neatly, in the way the pens were still aligned on his desk. I had avoided this room for weeks because I knew it carried answers, and answers are heavier than questions. The center drawer was locked. I remembered the way he used to press his thumb to the hidden groove at the back, a trick he never taught anyone else. My hand found it almost by instinct, and the drawer slid open with a soft click. Inside lay the leather-bound journal I had seen before, but beneath it was a sealed envelope with my name written in his firm, deliberate handwriting. I froze. The envelope was not new. Its edges were yellowed, the flap sealed with wax. He had planned this, maybe for years. My chest tightened as I picked it up, the weight of it far greater than the paper inside. For a long time, I could not bring myself to open it. My fingers traced the loops of my name again and again until finally I tore the seal. Inside were several sheets, his handwriting precise, each page marked with dates and notes. But there was more. A small USB drive slid out from the fold, landing in my palm like a stone. My breath caught. He had never trusted computers. He wrote everything by hand. If he had put something on a drive, it meant it was too dangerous to leave lying in a journal. I turned the first page. Alexandra, it began. If you are reading this, it means I am gone, and the choice I made has already caused the storm I predicted. You must understand, my estate is not only wealth, it is a shield. I left it to you because you are the only one who will not trade it for comfort or pride. The words blurred for a moment as tears filled my eyes, but I forced myself to keep reading. There are things you do not know. Your mother and Richard have been in talks with foreign investors for nearly a year. Their intent is to sell controlling interest in Harper Biotech to a conglomerate that has no loyalty to this country, to our workers, or to our family's legacy. If they succeed, the company will be gutted within a decade, jobs lost, research abandoned, everything I built turned to ash. I gripped the page so tightly it crumpled. He had known, he had seen it all, and he had prepared. The letter ended with a simple instruction. Keep this safe. When the time comes, use it. You will know when. My hands shook as I set the papers down. Then I stared at the USB drive. It took me an hour to gather the courage, another half hour to find my old laptop, the one that was not connected to any network. I slid the drive in and waited. There was only one file, a recording. The screen flickered and then his voice filled the room. I recognized the setting immediately. His study. The same desk I now sat at. Across from him sat my mother and Richard. Their faces were tense, impatient. Denise, he said, his voice steady, I will not sell. You are being stubborn, my mother snapped. You are tired. You should be enjoying the rest of your life, not babysitting a company. Richard leaned forward. The offer is generous, more than generous. With that money, you could secure the future for all of us. The company is the future, my grandfather answered. My workers depend on it, our name depends on it. You think Alexandra will run it? My mother said, her voice sharp. She is a child. She knows nothing about power. He did not hesitate. She knows more than you. She understands discipline. She has clarity. That is why it will be hers. The silence that followed was sharp enough to pierce skin. The video ended there, abruptly, as if he had turned the camera off on purpose. I sat back, trembling. The proof was undeniable. He had recorded them plotting, dismissing, revealing everything, and he had left it for me to find. This was the plot twist he had promised without ever saying the words. I spent the rest of the night printing transcripts, copying files, securing everything with Sophia's help. She listened in silence as I told her what I had found, her eyes widening only once when I handed her the USB. "This changes everything," she whispered. It did. The next day we filed the documents with the court as supplementary evidence. Sophia explained calmly to the clerk that the recording demonstrated two key facts. One, that my grandfather was fully aware and sound of mind when he made his decisions, and two, that there had been an active attempt by my mother and Richard to coerce him into selling the company. It was no longer a family quarrel. It was a case of protection against sabotage. That evening, Ethan and I sat in the kitchen, mugs of tea cooling between us. He listened quietly as I explained what I had uncovered. At first he said nothing, only stared at the wood grain of the table. Then he looked up, his expression a mixture of shock and betrayal. She was going to sell it all? He sounded younger than his 19 years. I nodded. She wanted the money, not the responsibility. His hands tightened around the mug. She used me, she lied to you, and she was ready to destroy everything he built. Yes, I said softly. And now we know for certain. We sat in silence, but it was not the same silence that had haunted me weeks earlier. This was the silence of revelation, of bonds reforged in truth. That night, as I stood in my apartment looking out at the city lights, I realized the weight had shifted. For weeks I had been defending, resisting, surviving. Now I was no longer on defense. My grandfather had armed me with truth. The war had changed. And for the first time, I believed I could win it. The hearing room smelled of old wood and paper, the kind of place where words weigh more than steel. I sat at the long table beside Sophia, my folder of evidence in front of me. Across the aisle, my mother and Richard whispered to their attorneys, their faces stiff with rehearsed confidence. Lillian was absent this time, perhaps too ashamed, perhaps simply tired of playing the role she never mastered. Ethan sat behind me, a silent presence, but his steady gaze felt like armor. The judge entered, and the room rose. My pulse thudded in my ears, but my face was calm. I had learned silence from my grandfather, and I carried it like a blade. Arguments began the way they always did, with legal jargon and pointed accusations. My mother's attorney claimed undue influence, painting me as a manipulative granddaughter who had cornered an old man in his final days. Richard added weight with his solemn nods, his eyes glinting with false conviction. I let them speak. When it was my turn, Sophia stood first. She laid out our response with calm precision. The will was updated months before his passing, in full capacity, witnessed, notarized. She spoke of discipline, of clarity, of intent. And then she placed her hand gently on my folder. "Miss Harper would like to submit additional evidence," she said. All eyes turned to me. My heart pounded, but I slid the envelope forward, then the USB drive. The clerk carried them to the judge. Sophia continued. "What you're about to hear is a recording made by the late Mr. Harper in his study. It confirms not only his clarity, but also the pressure exerted by Mrs. Harper and Mr. Gray to sell Harper Biotech against his wishes." The judge raised a brow, then pressed play. My grandfather's voice filled the room, steady and unmistakable. I closed my eyes, hearing it as though he were still alive, sitting across from me with his unshakable calm. "I will not sell," he said. My mother's voice followed, sharp and impatient. "You are tired. You should be enjoying the rest of your life. Let us handle this." Richard added, his tone oily. "The offer is generous. With that money, you can secure the future for all of us." And then my grandfather's reply, firm as stone, "The company is the future, and Alexandra will protect it." The recording ended abruptly, but its echo lingered. The silence that followed was suffocating. My mother's face drained of color, her lips tightening as though she could swallow the words back into her throat. Richard shifted uncomfortably, his bravado cracking. The judge leaned back, studying them. "This appears clear enough. The decedent was lucid, deliberate, and resistant to coercion. The will stands." Sophia nodded calmly. I exhaled, the weight of months lifting just slightly, but I was not finished. I opened the journal and read aloud the margin note in his own handwriting. "Alexandra has what Denise never learned: restraint, clarity. If she chooses to lead, this business may survive me. If she chooses to love, it may outlive us both." My voice wavered, but I steadied it. He did not leave this to me out of favoritism. He left it because he trusted me to protect it. And I will. The room was silent, except for the furious scribbles of the stenographer's pen. My mother tried to recover, her words brittle. You cannot run a company on sentiment. You are naive. Investors will not trust you. I turned to face her fully. Investors trust truth. They do not trust betrayal. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. Richard muttered something about appeals, but the fight had drained from his shoulders. The performance was over, and the curtain had fallen. When the session ended, I walked out into the sunlight with Ethan beside me. He looked at me with something I had never seen in his eyes before. Not confusion, not pity, respect. You did it, he whispered. I shook my head. He did it. I just carried his words. We stood there for a long moment, the courthouse looming behind us, the city alive with noise around us. For the first time in weeks, I felt the noise could not touch me. That night, back in my grandfather's study, I lit the small lamp on his desk. I opened the journal to the last page where his notes trailed off mid-sentence. I placed my pen beside it, my hand hovering. I was not ready to write yet, but soon I would, because the legacy was no longer only his. It was mine to shape, mine to protect, mine to build into something new, and for the first time, I did not feel afraid. I felt ready. When the courtroom doors closed behind me, I thought the silence would be permanent. I thought the storm was finished. But storms do not vanish just because the thunder fades. They leave debris behind, and it is the survivors who must clean it. The first weeks were chaos. Reporters followed me to work. Photographers camped outside the building. My name filled headlines, not for achievements, but for scandal. Heiress defies family. Granddaughter wins control. Society pages feasted on words like betrayal and greed. At night, when the city quieted, I scrolled through the articles until my chest ached, then shut the screen before I drowned in them. Inside the company, the atmosphere was no gentler. The board was polite but skeptical. I had been 27 years old, a woman with no formal title, suddenly holding every controlling share. They saw me as a placeholder, someone who would eventually bend to their seasoned experience. They did not expect me to speak in the meetings, let alone argue. I remember the first time I contradicted them. The conference room smelled of burnt coffee and impatience. A senior member, Mr. Carson, insisted we cut funding for a line of experimental compounds. Too costly, too uncertain, he said. The others murmured their agreement. I looked down at my grandfather's journal resting open on the table. His handwriting stared back at me. Innovation is slow until it is fast. Do not let short vision kill long vision. My voice was steady when I said, "We will not cut it." The room went quiet. Mr. Carson frowned, leaning back as though testing how much weight I could carry. "It is reckless," he said. "It is necessary," I answered. Eyes turned, whispers shifted. They were not used to me speaking. I was not used to it either. But something in me had shifted after that recording played in court. My grandfather had believed in my clarity. If I could not believe in it too, then I did not deserve his trust. The vote was tense, but my shares carried the decision. The project survived. That night I sat alone in his study, the leather chair creaking beneath me. For the first time I understood the loneliness of leadership. It is not the sound of empty rooms. It is the sound of your own voice echoing back at you, wondering if you chose right. Ethan found me there. He leaned against the doorway, his hair damp from rain, his face tired but alert. "You did well today," he said. I looked up, surprised. "You were not there," he smiled faintly. "Word travels." I gestured toward the journal. "What if I am wrong?" "Then you learn," he said simply. That is what he would have wanted. We fell into a rhythm in those months. Ethan began shadowing different departments, asking questions with a hunger that impressed even the most jaded managers. He came home each evening with stacks of notes, sometimes excited, sometimes frustrated, but always determined. One night over tea, he admitted, "I never thought I would belong here. I thought I was just the kid they used when they needed sympathy." "You are more than that," I said. His eyes flickered toward me uncertain. "You have what they do not," I continued. "Curiosity. You do not pretend to know everything." He looked down at his mug, but I saw the corners of his mouth twitch. That was the first night I realized he was beginning to believe in himself. Not everyone welcomed the change. Whispers from my mother's circle turned into articles into gossip on investor calls. They said I was too young, too emotional, too inexperienced. I kept every clipping, every transcript, slipping them into the growing binder on my shelf. Proof not of their power, but of their fear. Marcus kept me steady. He never tried to lead for me, never tried to make decisions in my place. He simply reminded me that I was still a person outside the boardroom. He dragged me to small diners when I forgot to eat, left flowers on my desk when I drowned in paperwork, and once showed up at midnight with ice cream because he knew I had lost a vote and needed to taste something sweet. "You are carrying a war on your back," he said that night. But wars are not won by weight, they are won by direction, and you have it. I wanted to believe him. By spring, the company shifted. Numbers improved, employees grew steadier, and whispers turned quieter. We hosted an internal forum to announce our new focus on sustainable biotech. I stood on stage, lights burning hot on my face, and spoke not with the voice of a frightened granddaughter, but with the voice of a leader. This is not just about profit, I said. It is about people, about a future where our name means more than money. Harper Biotech will not be remembered for what we sell, but for what we save. The applause was cautious at first, then stronger. Afterward, Ethan slipped me a note he had scribbled during the presentation. It said, simply, he would be proud. I carried that note in my pocket for weeks, but the past did not disappear. One evening, as I locked my office, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. A photo appeared. My mother at a dinner table, her smile sharp, Richard beside her. The caption beneath read, "The company will not last under her." For a moment my chest tightened, old fear curling back like smoke. Then I hit print. I slid the paper into my binder, closed it, and turned off the light. They could send shadows, but I had learned how to live in the dark. By the time summer arrived, I no longer felt like I was pretending. I had lost battles, yes, but I had also won ground. The company was breathing again. Ethan was flourishing. And I had begun to understand that legacy is not something you carry like a stone. It is something you build, brick by brick, even when your hands shake. One evening, Ethan knocked on my door holding a folder of his own. Inside were sketches, reports, and rough calculations for a project he called Green Labs. "It is not polished," he said nervously, "but I think it could work. A wing dedicated solely to renewable compounds. Small scale at first, but scalable." I studied his notes. They were rough, but his vision was clear. "You are serious about this?" I asked. His eyes burned with quiet fire. "Completely," I smiled. "Then let us build it." The plan Ethan showed me that night became more than sketches. Within weeks it grew into blueprints, then into proposals, then into heated discussions around the boardroom table. The board doubted him, of course. To them he was still a boy who had stumbled into a fortune, but I argued for him with the same fire my grandfather had once used for me. "Vision does not come from experience," I told them. "It comes from courage." And so Green Labs was born. We started small, a single floor in the east wing of the headquarters converted into a research hub. The walls smelled of new paint, the rooms echoed with the sound of eager footsteps. Ethan moved in almost immediately, living more in the lab than in his own apartment. He wore the exhaustion of a man who finally carried purpose. Watching him reminded me of my grandfather in the early photographs, young, stubborn, alive with possibility. The press took notice. Some mocked the project, calling it sentimental, a vanity initiative led by an inexperienced heir. But others praised it as bold, exactly the kind of risk Harper Biotech needed to reinvent itself. Slowly, doubt shifted into curiosity, curiosity into cautious respect. One morning, I walked into the lab to find Ethan asleep on a bench, papers spread across his chest, ink smudged on his cheek. I shook him awake and handed him a cup of coffee. "You cannot save the world if you're unconscious," I teased. His smile was groggy but proud. "Look at the data. We are close, closer than anyone thought." I flipped through his notes and felt something inside me settle. For months I had carried fear like a constant shadow. In that moment, watching him, I felt hope. Meanwhile, Marcus stood beside me through every storm. He never pushed me to choose between him and the company. Instead, he made himself part of the journey. When I collapsed from exhaustion, he dragged me to the coast for a day, letting the sea wash the noise out of my head. When critics laughed at our projects, he reminded me that laughter is only the sound before applause. One evening, after a long day at the lab, I asked him quietly, "Why do you stay?" He looked at me, his expression softer than words. "Because you are not just building a company, you are building a life, and I want to be in it." I held onto those words more tightly than any contract. Not all bonds healed. My mother wrote once a letter full of delicate phrases and regret. She wanted reconciliation or perhaps only access. I read it in silence, then folded it into the binder with the rest of her shadows. I could not erase the past, and I did not wish to pretend it never happened. Distance was my mercy. Lillian surprised me more. She visited the office one afternoon, hesitant, carrying a box of old photographs. "I thought you might want these," she said. Inside were images of my grandfather as a young man, laughing, sleeves rolled up in the early days of the company. For the first time in years, her eyes held no calculation, only weariness. We spoke little, but when she left I felt a thread, thin but unbroken. Some ties are not repaired by force. They are simply left to mend in time. As months passed, green labs grew louder. Experiments turned into prototypes, prototypes into tangible results. The day our first sustainable compound passed preliminary trials, the entire building buzzed with celebration. Investors who had once doubted called me personally, their voices eager. For the first time, the narrative shifted. Harper Biotech was no longer a family scandal. It was a leader in innovation. On the anniversary of my grandfather's passing, we unveiled the Harper Research Wing. The building gleamed in the morning sun, banners hanging with the words for the future. Employees, partners, and students gathered. Ethan stood beside me, his tie crooked, his smile uncontainable. I stepped to the podium, my speech trembling in my hands, but when I looked out at the crowd, I felt no fear, only gratitude. My grandfather built this company on discipline and clarity, I began. He taught me that legacy is not about what we inherit, but what we create. Today we open this wing not just for science, but for people. For every young mind who believes curiosity can change the world, for every worker who trusts that their labor matters. This is not my legacy alone, it is ours. The applause rose like a wave, carrying me higher than I had ever stood. Later that evening, when the crowd dispersed and the building quieted, I returned to his study. The same lamp, the same desk, the same journal waiting in the drawer. I opened it to the final page where his words had trailed off. My pen hovered above the paper. I wrote slowly, carefully, as though he were watching. Today we opened the Harper Research Wing. Today Ethan stood beside me not as a boy, but as a leader. Today we built something that will outlive us. This is the legacy we share. I set the pen down, tears blurring the ink. For the first time, I did not feel like a child in his shadow. I felt like his equal. Closing the journal, I left it unlocked on the desk. Legacy, I had learned, is not a secret to guard. It is a story to continue. As I stepped to the window, the city stretched before me, alive with light. My reflection stared back, no longer the girl who walked into a hostile meeting that Sunday, but a woman who had carried her name through fire and emerged unbroken. I whispered into the quiet, not as a prayer, but as a promise. I will not sell. I will build. And in the silence that followed, I almost heard his voice answer, steady and proud.